So, in everyone's life, there are moments which we only realize in hindsight were pivotal. These pivotal moments are when the course of our lives change in our careers, our relationships, the sense of self that we have. It's a moment like the way your father squeezed your hand when you left for college, or the day you chose to walk instead of take your usual route into work. The first time you were on a date and you both could order dessert without feeling awkward or making jokes about it. Only in retrospect sometimes can we nail down these specific moments where things changed for us in a big way. And for me, one of these moments was the day I hit the page up key at Steve Krumfoltz's house. Steve's a guy that I went to high school with, and we're both geeky kids into computers. We'd hang out on the weekend, we'd play some music, and Steve was into games, and I wasn't so much into games. So Steve was the person who'd show me stuff for the first time, like Grand Theft Auto or Duke Nukem 3D. And this one afternoon, Steve calls me over, we hang out, we play some music, and he's like, all right, check this thing out. And he pulls up a program on his computer that doesn't look like anything I've ever seen before. He's all right, come here. Hit the page up key. Okay. And I hit the page up key, and I hit it a couple more times, and like walls start appearing. And I'm delighted, right? Like, we just make this little crummy level, we slap some textures on it, and before you know it, running around a level in Duke Nukem 3D. And this was all just because like Steve's mom had been at the mall, saw the Duke level design handbook, which has a copy of the build engine in the back sleeve, on a CD-ROM, and we had access to this tool that we didn't know existed. And for me, at least, the hook was set. I found myself drawn back into PC games, back into playing games like Half-Life or Unreal or, Radiant-based games like Dark Forces that I could make stuff for. And this moment wasn't just important for me because it was the first time I used a level editor and I became a level designer. Like, that was important, sure, but it would take a lot more luck, practice, and people involved in my life to bring me, sort of to where I am here today. The specific thing about that moment was that it became this gradually dawning epiphany about the nature of tools and collaboration. Because, I mentioned I was like a geeky kid into computers, but not games, but that hadn't always been the case. Like a lot of kids my age at the time, one day my dad brought home an Apple IIc, and it was awesome, and I would copy the source code for games out of the back of Nibble, and I'd make things, and that was really rewarding, and I was really happy. So little tiny me wanted to make games. Like, I tried to make games, but my early experiments with programming and following courses were really discouraging, and I ended up convincing myself that I wasn't smart enough. I couldn't program, and so I could never make games, and I just sort of drifted away from the notion entirely and didn't really engage with games and computers. But in the time that I had been growing up, so too had the game industry. And now we had programmers creating tools that would empower other people on their teams. Because games were no longer being made by an individual programmer in a windowless office somewhere. They're being made by these huge teams of 4, 6, 14 people that were required to make a big budget title. And so for the first time, I realized there was a place for me. A place for people like me who could bring something to the table. And modding was this different level of engagement for me. I wasn't just consuming games, but I wasn't really ready to create games either. I just wanted to know how they worked. I wanted to tinker and dabble and use them a little bit. And I don't think my story is unique at all among game developers. I think a lot of us kind of got our legs modding, and we're really happy modding and tinkering. And the mod scene gave us a place to do that and gave us a place to get our training wheels on and learn how to create from whole cloth. And that, in a nutshell, is what this talk's about today, because I want to go over the history of modding and why modding is important, why modding has had an impact on the course of our careers, the way we work, the industry, the way people buy and play games, and how that relevance continues on today, where modding is still important and continues to affect things and isn't just a relic of a bygone era. And as the title promises, we'll talk about how this specifically has impacted Bethesda. Not just the obvious ways that you can probably guess at, but more subtle benefits to modding, which are very internal, which have affected us gradually over the years that we've been involved with our community. On the off chance that anybody's really confused right now, modding is shorthand for user modification, and there are all kinds of different mods. Total conversions that change virtually everything, or level packs that just add some more content. You have HD mods, which just do higher res assets, things like that. But in general, for the purposes of this talk, they're all the same thing in terms of any sort of aftermarket modification a user makes to the game is considered a mod. And when we think of mods, we often think of that golden era of PC gaming in the mid to late 90s and somewhat into the early 2000s, where every game seemed to be shipping with mod tools, and it was this hot topic, and it rode in on the wave of, broad acceptance of the internet at blazing fast, 14.4 kilobytes per second, right? We all suddenly had access and awareness to this. And so it was attractive to anybody who wanted to dabble, who wanted to learn, who wanted to create. And at the time, mods represented the absolute, perfect junction point between the cutting edge of technology and accessibility. Because at this time period, if you were serious about computer graphics or virtual worlds at all, you needed some pretty serious hardware. This SGI machine from 1997 was only $75,000 after a 45% price reduction that year. 3D Studio Max, $3,500, is out of the range of a casual dabbler, out of the range of a hobbyist, out of the range of anybody curious. So you have all these people at this time, in the mid-90s, where everybody's excited about computer graphics and virtual technologies, but many of us are alienated from it, financially, culturally, technologically. So along comes something like Unreal, and you can buy a copy of Unreal, which is awesome unto itself, for $50. It runs on, a moderately equipped PC that you already have at home, and it comes with a free level editor. And so all of a sudden, you have this sort of disruption in this space where everybody can try it. Everybody can play around with it, and you don't have to commit. You don't have to take a course in CAD and get a job working somewhere in Silicon Valley using an SGI rig. You can do it right now on mom and dad's computer. And so this brought together this community of people, again, the early days of the internet, where people are now able to talk to each other in these niche interests about things on, a Usenet. I learned to do this, and I have this technique for a mod, or I made this mod, or does somebody know how to solve this problem? And in some ways, I think the indie scene today is actually, owes some of its cultural phenomenon to the way the mod scene was in that time period, where the mod scene to me then was like a moment of disruption, right? Like Unity brought engine licensing to the masses, and so did Unreal and Hammer and Worldcraft to the masses in the mod period. The types of people who are attracted to indie development today were previously alienated financially or culturally or technologically from games. And I think that this is just sort of the legacy of mods continuing on in a different form today. And mods have done a lot of things in the industry, in the time that we've had them around. Mods are capable of doing things that other games can't because the risk is relatively low. When you're making a mod, you're really only gambling with your own time, your own willingness to pursue an idea. So modders can try all kinds of ideas, big, small, strange, and some of those ideas will stick. Mods can become games unto themselves when they do hit upon an idea that feels worth pursuing at a higher level. Gunman Chronicles was picked up by Valve and put on retail shelves, which was unheard of at the time. Games like Dear Esther and Natural Selection, which go on to become much bigger than the original sort of niche of a mod-scoped project. Mods help launch careers, not just people like me who trained themselves up on mods, but important, notable creators like Davey Redden or Dean Hall, Robin Walker, who all came from mod careers into being able to do this full time and become, dedicated professionals in the field, and that was all owed to their time in mods. Not just individuals, but dev teams have been founded out of mod teams that hit the threshold where they no longer had to be part-time hobbyists, but they could become full-time professionals. But perhaps the most impactful thing that mods have done is actually forging whole new genres which would never have existed if not for somebody's ability to experiment with an idea and try something that mainstream game development was unwilling or unable to try prior. Dota 2 and League of Legends are both, lifted from Defense of the Ancients, a Warcraft mod. Team Fortress 2 began life as a Quake mod. DayZ, Arma 2 mod. Counter-Strike basically invented how we currently think of competitive shooters and esports, and that was a Half-Life mod. But, I did mention that we do sometimes think of mods as something that has kind of come and seen its day in the sun and is part of that era behind us in the golden days of PC gaming. When I started preparing this talk and thinking about it over the past several months, I had a prediction for GDC this year, and so we can all see if I was right or wrong. I think we're all going to hear a lot about UGC this week. UGC is a big, scary acronym, but it just stands for user-generated content, and it's all the BizCats are going to be talking about. User-generated content is a term borrowed from another tech industry, social media, web. Look, if you're making Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, you're not interested in making content. What you're interested in doing is creating a framework so that other people can come into your platform and create content. So the people who make Twitter don't really care about how best to make a compelling 140-character tweet. They care about giving you a gateway to do it and then making sure that they have tools to help those tweets cross-pollinate, rise to the top, drive eyeballs into their system, and make money for them. So this is something that business people are trying to find a way to bring into games. And the individual game probably most responsible for getting this conversation going is Minecraft. So Minecraft is so simple, but so bananas successful that it proved to everyone that people wanted to play with their creativity. People wanted to make things, because what else can you do in Minecraft, right? And so we've seen this deluge of games that support some form of UGC out of the box. You have games like Project Spark or Disney Infinity, which are sort of all about supporting user-generated content. But then you have big traditional games with multiplayer and single-player campaigns like Halo and Far Cry 4 that have really surprisingly robust level design tools right in the main menu that you can play with a controller and then share with people. We've seen this in smaller scope games, indie games as well. So UGC is a big deal right now, and that buzzword can imply that it's a new idea, and it really isn't. The notion of creative play and playing outside of the box of pre-authored content has been around for a while. One of the games on that list I mentioned is Little Big Planet. It's not new. Little Big Planet has been around, right? The first game splashed in 2008, huge success, established a franchise. But Little Big Planet wasn't totally unique at the time. You had other smaller games like WarioWare DOI. WarioWare has really, you can't describe it as anything other than visual scripting on the right-hand side and then sprite tools on the left. It wasn't new then either. PlayStation 2 games like Time Splitters and Tenchu 2 had level editors right in there. Around the same time period, you had games like High Heat Baseball. High Heat Baseball let you make really, bizarre changes to the rules of baseball and to team rosters. Save those out as plugin files and share them with your friends on this brand new internet that you have. Bungie's Myth 2 Soulblighter, big game in a mod community. It espoused a plugin-based format that let, again, people share the content that they were creating with their game. A lot of PC gamers have fond memories of The Incredible Machine. The Incredible Machine doesn't look like a UGC game in the modern sense, but it is a game that emphasized creativity and problem-solving with a set of tools. Excitebike had a level editor in the main menu, and it was a cartridge-based game for Famicom and NES. I mean, this is a super early console example of UGC in that sense. I've stood up here before and talked about modular assets to build gameplay, to build spaces. Pinball construction set is a set of Lego pieces to create your own pinball tables and arranging those mechanics spatially. The granddaddy of it all is probably the adventure construction set. This was a DOS game that let you play a handful of RPG adventures that came with it. But what it was really about was allowing you to create your own RPG adventures, and it had editing tools to change every aspect and create things out of whole cloth. So the idea has been around a while, and this pivot towards UGC as like a biz model or whatever, right? Like that's just a new acknowledgement, a fresh acknowledgement of people wanting to create. People who aren't developers and probably, may never want to be developers, do want to participate. They do want to express themselves and be creative. And that kind of brings me around to where, the Bethesda specific part of things comes in. And to begin talking about how Bethesda and modding are sort of tied up with each other, I'll just do a very brief overview of our history with it. So in 2002, Morrowind came out. And Morrowind actually wasn't the first Elder Scrolls game to support modding. Daggerfall, which came before, actually had and actually still has, a really thriving, clever mod community. But Morrowind was the first time where official tools were provided by the developer. And this was such a priority that anybody who had a physical copy, like if anybody in here remembers having a jewel case, it had 2 discs. It had the game and it had the editor right there. Like everyone had access from the store to mod Morrowind. And so that decision, that really helped establish and empower our mod community to start becoming a thing and growing. And it was successful enough that in 2005, when Oblivion came out, we wanted to continue. And so we released an updated version of our tools. We do that again with Fallout 3. And our latest game, Skyrim, which came out in 2011, even though we had moved on to a new engine under the hood, it was really important to us to actually maintain the same workflow, the same editor tools, the same pipeline we were used to, because that way our content creation process wasn't going to be disrupted by sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater and the new engine shift. And this also meant that our modders could also draw upon a decade of experience. Anybody who had done any modding for any of our previous titles would be able to mod for Skyrim and have a familiarity with those tools. So it really helped us as a dev team, but it was also really big for keeping our mod community alive and thriving and allowing to build on a knowledge base rather than start from scratch. We also, after the release of Skyrim, collaborated with Valve, and we were the first non-Valve game to support the Steam Workshop, which is a platform within Steam for uploading and sharing and rating mods and helping people discover and install them more easily, because anybody who installed mods in the 90s remembers blue screening a computer or two doing it. So like I said, there are a lot of benefits, and a couple of the benefits I think are super obvious things that anybody who read the talk description probably could guess at. And the first of those is that mods can help you to build a community. Now, words like community and social have meaning today that they didn't really have a decade ago. When Morrowind came out, really, there were the forums. And the forums were and continue to be the place where you would go and talk to other creators or find out just what mods are cool and new or find out how to solve a problem you had. But the world has changed and expanded, and now one of the big things you can go and sort of observe, if you look at YouTube, a lot of the Skyrim-related content on there are actually Let's Plays with particularly weird mods or combination of mods. We see the same thing on Twitch, where people are streaming. And again, most of the people streaming Skyrim are doing it with mods. Not necessarily playing the vanilla game, but really interested in what mods can do to change the experience. It extends beyond actual gameplay to things like fan fiction, to fan art, to cosplay. And all of this stuff builds a community, but I think more importantly, it's all forms of expression. And I think we as creators should give our medium credit. Enthusiasm for games can extend well beyond our interest in actually playing a game. Like, the amount of time that anybody wants to engage with the physical act of playing the game is limited by any number of factors. But the ideas and the inspirations that those games can put into us go outside of the scope of that. And for all of you who are here at a game developers conference, you're not playing a game right now, you're thinking about games, talking about games, you've invested a part of your life into that. That's not limited to developers. Fans also want to find ways to express themselves, express the enthusiasm that they have for the medium. And so all of these are just part of that puzzle, but I think mods in particular are a really interesting and powerful and direct way for people to express their thoughts about the game in the same context that we as developers do. And it can create a relationship and a community, not just amongst the modders themselves, but to the development team itself. So the other really obvious one is maybe a little less touchy-feely, sales. When you support mods and you have a thriving mod community, that can extend the financial lifespan of your game. So this is where BizCat's eyes lights up, because this is where the bottom line can be affected. So in order to talk about this, everybody should have a really basic understanding of the typical sales lifespan of a game. So this is just a made-up example, but it's fairly indicative of how a game with a traditional, launch after some lead-up will do. So hopefully you've had good hype, you've had good pre-release, lead-up of whatever kind, and the game launches, and it sells the best numbers it will ever sell. So everyone who already wanted the game buys it. Your sales drop off into sort of a hum of sales, which will continue. There are things that developers and publishers can do to spike these sales, like doing a temporary price reduction, a sale. Take $10 off the game, more people buy the game when it's cheaper, and more people actually continue to buy the game even if the price goes up. But this too will diminish and go back down towards, a lower number. You can do permanent price drops where you go from, $30 to $20 to $10 or whatever, and you can do other promotions like participating in a bundle. But in general, particularly after the first 6 months or year that a game is out, you're going to atrophy towards not selling any more copies. I don't think any of this surprises anybody who buys or sells games. And this is most exemplified in the manifestation of the bargain bin. Anybody who's ever fished a game box out of a crate and it's encrusted in like layers of like markdown stickers, like you had an idea where it was in its life cycle, right? So games tend to atrophy down towards zero, and that just happens. Now, in 2002, Morrowind came out alongside a lot of other really great PC games. It's a strong year for PC gaming. But 3, 5, 6, 7 years after 2002, you could still go into a Best Buy and pick up a copy of Morrowind for $20, $30, depending on the year you're talking about. And the only other game that you could do that with would be like Warcraft 3, which also came out in 2002. And these games stayed on the shelves for a perception that they had for long-term replay value. Now, a game like Morrowind and all the games that we've done at Bethesda have like a reputation for having lots of core content. And you can talk about whether somebody should buy a game with 6 hours or 10 hours or 40 hours or 100 hours of content, whatever. But when you take that and you say things like multiplayer or modding become part of the equation, now you've gone from maybe dozens of hours of content to theoretically infinite hours of content, and that can increase the value of people who need to think about things like that in their game buying decisions. So this chart here is just sort of a random take from Valve's Steam charts of the number of people playing a game on Steam at that given second. And Skyrim's, it's not a new game at this point, and it still sits near the top of that list. And if you look at the other titles on that list, they pretty much all have some form of creative play, mods, UGC, or multiplayer. The other thing that mods can do to extend the lifetime of sales in your game is keeping the game in the public eye. Particularly weird, ambitious, creative mods have a way of getting stories run on news sites. Marketing people would love to pay money for this. They can't. You can't buy this kind of thing. You can only have this thing by empowering a mod community of interesting, weird, creative people who can actually go and do these inspired things and then create news stories that people want to read and write about. And it keeps your game kind of in the consciousness of like, oh yeah, that game's around. I might want to go and play it. One of the more extreme examples of this is when your game actually becomes a platformer for mods, where the mods become more compelling than the base game itself. It's happened with our games, where there are people who don't really care about Skyrim, but they see an interesting mod, and that mod is actually why they would want to play the game. Just Cause 2 shot to the top of the Steam sales charts when the multiplayer mod came out. A lot of people went and bought Just Cause 2 just because they wanted to play this mod that they saw generating headlines on all the sites that they were reading. DayZ is probably one of the most dramatic examples of that, where Arma 2 was a game which was probably in the twilight of the copies it was going to sell, when all of a sudden DayZ blows up, and now everybody's buying Arma 2, and the game stays at the top of the Steam sales charts for weeks on end, all because this mod exists. This doesn't offend me. It shouldn't offend anybody whose game is getting bought so that people can play the mods. And it's only possible if you have a game which has a potential for interesting mods to exist. But like I said, building community, extending your sales, I think anybody here probably could have guessed that those are the benefits. And those are good benefits, they're significant. But supporting mods isn't like a free thing. It takes time, effort, energy, attention. And I think part of what has made it worth it for Bethesda are some things which are a little bit less obvious. So one of the things which is integral to how we work and how our mod community works is the data format we use. Now, imagine back. Again, 2002, Morrowind comes out. But before that, you have this dev team that wants to make an ambitious, open-world, big RPG. They need to be able to work sort of on top of each other in that space, and they're also transitioning to a new engine. They went from the homegrown Daggerfall tools to the Gamebryo engine, and so they needed a way to work that they could actually collaborate with. And so what they came up with was the plugin and master file format. And so a plugin is essentially just the format of the file that our editor generates when you save. So a developer comes along, and she's doing stats on creature balance or creating weapons, doing whatever she needs to do, saves her work, generates a plugin, and when she's done, she will check in or merge that work with the master file. just like any other version control system. So the master file, or the ESM, will then just get a little bit bigger with the changes that she's made. The next developer comes along and he's building a dungeon or working on a region or plugging in music. That also all gets saved into the same plugin format. He checks in, and any modifications to the master file get changed, and any additions go on top. The cycle continues, master file gets bigger and bigger, until eventually one day we're done, and we have this base game master file, which represents all the content that's going to go into the game. So this allowed the team to work collaboratively, and it's still basically our version control system today. But it also establishes how our mods are actually going to integrate with the base game. Because we have this big chunk of data, which is the master file, but then when we release our tools, it's just a version of the exact same tool that we use. We don't have to spend time engineering a unique tool for modders to use. We just drop a version of our stuff with very minimal housekeeping done, so that they can then use that, save, and they have their own plugin files, which are the mod files that they are actually able to load alongside the master file. And you can load those concurrently and do all kinds of things with them. This data format also would continue to serve us going forward into Oblivion. So think back again to like 2005 is when Oblivion comes out, and the notion of DLC is a thing. Now in 2005, we had console manufacturers which were pushing this new concept of DLC. But it wasn't really a thing back then, right? So they wanted to make DLC. Again, they're creating a platform and relying on us, the developers, to bring content. And meanwhile, the developers are just wondering what this even means. How do we make it? How do we, expect to know what people even want to play or what it's going to cost? Now, one of the big problems was the how do we make it? Because most dev teams at this point were accustomed to generating a big thing, and then it goes out. And so the idea of having clean modular data wasn't really important, because it was all going to get squished onto a disk and put in a box anyway. But we already had our mod integration, so we knew already how to support content post-release because we'd been doing it for several years. So we had our base game, which supports mods, and we could make some changes to our data format to now allow multiple master files to be loaded. So DLCs were effectively new master files that were loaded adjacent to the base game master file. And even better for the PC community, this meant that you could have modders that could be working just in the base game, or you could also have modders who work off of the DLC master files, and those could live together in harmony without any conflicts. So this did give us a big head start on other developers in terms of being able to get a pipeline that could generate post-release content, but there were still a lot of other questions. We didn't know what people wanted. We didn't know what kind of issues would happen. I mean, it's one thing for us to push content to the internet for a PC game, but going through these new cockamamie DLC front ends, this was brand new stuff that Sony and Microsoft didn't really know what they were doing at the time either, because it was all new and just being built. We didn't even know what we should charge. I mean, at the time, the only other DLC you could buy were Xbox Blade themes, which cost $2, right? So that your background could have, cameo elements of power or perfect dark on it. So we needed to come up with the right idea. We needed something that would test enough of our systems, would add some new art, add some new dialogue, add some new hooks and quests to the game, that would test the deployment pipeline, and just sort of feel out the market for what was the best thing we could possibly do. And so what we came up with was horse armor. Now, the horse armor is, it's a little bit of a whipping boy. It's a running joke for the internet. Look, horse armor did a lot of stuff for us internally. It proved out our pipeline. We knew how to make DLC now. We had done it. Nobody else had done it, but we had a pipeline that we could actually push something out, test it, get it up onto the services, and have people being able to purchase it. And it led the way for more complex DLC. So at a time when other developers, for the most part, were constrained to doing things like gun packs or cash packs for games, we were releasing content like Knights of the Nine or the Shivering Isles for Oblivion, which were very, very big DLCs that had, content on par with some other full games being brought out. All of the Fallout 3 DLCs. If you look at the Oblivion DLCs, they kind of are all over the map in terms of what they are and their scope and their pricing. And by Fallout 3, we kind of had figured out what we wanted to do. And all those more ambitious DLCs were on the back of the horse armor that had sort of paved the way for us. And, there's something to be said for giving the internet something to make fun of. you know you've made it, I guess. And like I said, you know, horse armor can get trotted out and pointed at, and
Joel.
it's a dead horse. Horse armor is often at the center of debates about the nature of DLC and what's good about it, what's bad about it. But whether or not you like DLC or you like the way that, you know, DLC is being made, it's here, right? Like, it's part of the model. This is a slide taken from an EA shareholders publicly available thing that came out last year. Now, I'm just a small town country lawyer, but that green bar is big. That green bar is all DLC and in-app purchases across mobile and console games. The blue bar, those are games that you actually just buy, like, you know, we used to just do. The yellow is mobile stuff, and the purple is subscriptions and ad revenue. DLC is a huge part of that. The BizCats love it. So it's sticking around. But one thing, and this, you know, this is all kind of an aside about DLC, but it's worth keeping the perspective in mind that if you go back through games, you didn't used to have options post-release. Like, if you wanted to play a game that you enjoyed that had ended, or you wanted to make more content for a game you had made, you could make a sequel, but that was about it. So over the years, we've gotten more options, more ways to support games that deserve support, for people to play more of the games that they want to play without having to create or wait for something as, you know, titanic as a sequel. And so things like in-app purchases and UGC and DLCs, you know, even things like early access, these are all just part of an expanding ecosystem of how people can support and play games. And one of the things that it's coming into acceptance now, and I hope gains more, is the idea of modders actually being able to enter into this as well and participate. The idea of modders actually getting paid for the work that they do. Valve put this press release out a month or two ago maybe, and they're talking about how Dota 2 and TF2 modders who've been able to sell their content have earned upwards of $50 million. That's a chunk of change, right? And so they're expanding this to non-Valve developers, where other games are going to be able to now allow their modders to put content up to be candidates for DLC in those games. And I think this is great because, you know, I've already said that supporting mods can help build a community and help sell the game, so having a thriving mod community is a good thing for the game, and it also lets the modders actually be rewarded for the value that they bring to the games, because modders have been making our games better for years and years. Now they can actually be supported directly by fans who want to. Like I said, it's too early to tell whether this is going to catch on and become a big thing, but I really hope it does, because I'd rather see the modders make the money than some of the other guys. So shifting gears, one of the other things which I think is really uniquely awesome about working on a game which has a mod community is modders now can demonstrate for you these sort of alternate reality versions of your game. What if Fallout 3 had greenery? There's a mod for that. What if we had gone a different direction with the dragons in Skyrim? Mod for that. What if the Skyrim Civil War was far more ambitious in its scope and its reach? What if we didn't have to worry about things like performance, right? We had a lot of big ideas for the Civil War. And mods can go right to ideas that are things we avoided or cut or had to scale back, or ideas that we didn't have. One of the beautiful things about modders is getting an idea out as a modder doesn't require the same level of polish. You don't have to worry about whether it fits the vision or is lore friendly or whatever. You can just make it. Nobody's telling you you can't. You can just make it and try it. And being a developer and being able to view that, I'm going to talk faster now, is a really wonderful, special thing. Modders have a way of identifying places where a game was going to go one direction or another. Like anybody, whether you worked on a game by yourself or as part of a big team, you remember points where the game was going to go down path A or path B. And at the end of the day, you can only have one. Modders have a sort of intuition for going right to those things and giving you the opportunity as a developer to then play their mod and see what if. What if we had gone the other direction? It can validate your assumptions or challenge your assumptions. There are several mods that have influenced our games. Ascuro's Overhaul influenced how we changed the leveling systems from Oblivion to Fallout 3. The Deadly Reflex mod for Oblivion completely influenced our heavier feel, more brutal, lethal feel of archery in Skyrim. Open Cities attempted to do stuff that we couldn't do for design and technological considerations in Skyrim because we couldn't have those cities just open out to the world. And as modders are doing these things, they build up a knowledge base all of their own. Ever since Oblivion forward, we've released the wiki for our own tools. And this is a version of our internal documentation that we just put out, and within about a month, it's completely useless to us, which is awesome, because it evolves. It becomes specific to the act of modding, to the problems that they have. We can look at the sort of things that they make YouTube tutorials about, see what their workflows are, see what problems they have. This can influence decisions we make about our tool set going forward. Having a tool like that out in the public also has a very real benefit when it comes to hiring. If somebody wants to work at Bethesda, a developer can email me. She can be referred right to the tool set and told, well, this is the part of the tool you'd be using, this is how it works, and make a decision right there. If they need a design test, we don't have to give them a theoretical test in Unity or Unreal. They can just play or create something that we can play in our own tools and have a very apples-to-apples conversation. As far as the influence on decisions we make day to day, it can keep us honest. Programmers in the room are familiar with the concept of eating your own dog food. Eat your own dog food is thrown around in programming for anybody who makes something for other people to use. And it means that you have to know what it's like to use your own tool, otherwise you will make poor decisions about how to evolve that tool. And there's always the temptation to make things which are just good enough. So these are 5 of our tools programmers at Bethesda. Now, these guys do a lot of stuff to help facilitate the dev team, but these 3 guys actually don't matter when we're talking about the tool set because they don't do anything for the tools. Only these 2 guys, and they're not dedicated tools programmers, they have a lot of other responsibilities. So you can imagine when the rubber hits the road and you have to decide between doing an implementation of a tool in the right way versus doing something that feels more like it advances the game, you'll go towards the thing that advances the game, even though that's often a short-term benefit, because our tool set, remember, goes back to before Morrowind came out. Every decision we made there has paid dividends for years down the road, whereas decisions to make Skyrim better only benefit Skyrim. So we can have this mentality, this awareness, and ask ourselves if modders will use tools. And if it's something that modders are going to use often or solves a big problem they have, or they're going to, use it to work around something in a better way than they have in the past, that can actually guide us towards a more responsible decision. So anyway, I'll summarize because apparently I need to, but we've covered a lot of things. Some of these are more practical and material than others. But the last thing I want to talk about is something that we refer to as the modder mentality. And the modder mentality isn't always a positive thing, right? Because modders, they're used to working with what they have. Tools which are buggy, crashy, undocumented, and they don't always have access to a colleague or a coworker who can warn them away from a pitfall or give them the best way to solve a problem. But a good modder doesn't let that stop them. They have a stubborn refusal to acknowledge dead ends. And come hell or high water, you're going to find a way to make your idea work. And that can be a bad thing because those kinds of solutions aren't beautiful. They can be complex, they can be fragile, bug-prone, and those are big problems when you're talking about a professional dev team. You can't have hacks and shortcuts. These things become a cancer if they're left unchecked. So it means sometimes that people who have this modder's mentality do need help learning best practices, learning how to collaborate on a dev team. But the resourcefulness of modders, that's a special thing. It's an intent, it's a willingness to prioritize your creative intent over the technical hurdles that might stop you. And that kind of pluckiness is a vital quality to have on a team because you can have a nearsightedness set in when you're just trying to get the game done. And that nearsightedness can take us away from the things that actually made us want to make the game in the first place. And that's something that I think we owe around Bethesda to the mod community, which we've hired from, which we've contributed to, which we've interfaced with, and has influenced the way that we think as a team. And I think it's the most immaterial thing in the world, but possibly the most important thing that's benefited us from supporting mods over the years. And that's all I got.